Okay, and we are recording our last psychoacoustic session. I believe it's Unit 6, and the topic is called masking. We should be able to finish this session today. And once we're done this, we've essentially covered acoustics and psychoacoustics. Next semester, we are renaming this course to bioacoustics. It's called bioacoustics at the program where I teach at Douglas College in Vancouver, Canada, and it's called bioacoustics at a number of different HIS programs. It also sounds a little more friendly than acoustics and psychoacoustics. Psychoacoustics might scare the bejesus out of people, who knows.
Right.
Anyway, it sure is awful to hear what is going on in California with those fires. It's all we're hearing about on the news this side of the border. Awful. They say it's the worst fire in California history. Just terrible.
Yeah, very bad.
So it's been a strange year for all these things. What do you call it, eh? It's anyway, we will next week. We are ahead of schedule, which is great. I'd like to hold a review session, and Rebecca Krause and Lynn Royer and I are talking about holding that at 7 p.m. Central Time, probably on a Tuesday or a Thursday toward the end of the month of November. So I'm just making that announcement to anybody who watches this Zoom session later on. And I love OTC's generously long semesters. They're 15 weeks, which is great. For me, for teachers, that's fantastic. It gives us time. It just gives you breathing room. And since we're a little bit ahead of schedule that way, we can afford to put in a review session. Also, next week's Zoom session will cover non-electronic acoustic modifications in hearing aids. Weird topic. I'll say that again. Non-electronic, so it's got nothing to do with wires and cords, but the physical shapes of the piece that's fitting in your ear, and what that has to do, how that sculpts and shapes the sound due to mass and stiffness, and why hearing aids have little holes in them called vents. What do vents do? Okay, so these are things that you'll be able to appreciate because you've taken 120 anatomy and you've taken acoustics, and it kind of puts things together, and it's a fairly decent way to say amen to this course. Okay, without any further ado, why don't we share screen, and we'll go to the notes for this particular section here. Psychoacoustics, this one's called Masking, Critical Bands, Binaural Masking Level Differences. We've covered binaural masking level differences in Unit 4. Or I think it was, yeah, when we talked about binaural hearing. And we'll look at it that quickly again. It has to do with that cocktail effect. But that's sort of the way we'll finish. We'll look at masking here. And when you think about masking, we don't need to think about Halloween. Masking is the covering of one sound with another. And we've all learned in 120, when we looked at cochlear physiology, we looked at upward spread of masking. And that's kind of what we're looking at here, but we're looking at it more from a psychoacoustic point of view instead of more from an anatomical point of view. So, excuse me, masking is any sound that covers or hides another sound from being heard. Now, in our field, that is usually background noise. And background noise prevents people from hearing the high-frequency consonants of speech, especially people who are wearing hearing aids. That's the biggest challenge for hearing aid wearers is background noise. They'll all tell you that, okay? And it doesn't mean that they need to have some cheese with their wine, okay? You need to extend your heart and realize there's reasons why. And a lot of it has to do with the lack of a sharpened traveling wave, as in outer hair cell action. And a lot has to do with the phenomenon called the upward spread of masking. So when we look in what we'll read here in audiometry, masking is put into, now here's this, let me show you a picture in PowerPoint, okay? This will help make it clear. In clinical good old audiometry, look at the weird thing that I drew here. You can see these, this is your middle ear, the gray area, and your eustachian tube going down to your throat. Here's your cochlea, and here's the outer ear canal that I'm circling right here. Now, in clinical audiometry, when you're testing hearing, okay, read what it says in this slide here. While presenting a loud tone to the bad ear, so this masking is done when there's a big difference between ears. When there's like the good ear hears down to 0 decibels and the bad ear can't hear till about 70 or something, okay, and there's a big difference. If you put a lot of sound into the bad ear, it's going to cross the skull and cross over to the good ear. You see, when you think about things, your head is a pail. Here it is. It can hold a certain amount of coffee. And once you pour more coffee, it's going to spill over. And that's how you should think about your head in masking. If I've got a bad ear, and I put a lot of sound into the bad ear, it's going to cross my skull through bone conduction, and it's going to get to my good ear, and I'm going to raise my hand and say I heard the tone. Now that's when the need for masking arises, because you've got to keep the good ear busy with masking noise so that it can't hear the tone going through into the bad ear. And then I'll be able to find out the true hearing level of the bad ear. So masking is done to show how bad the bad ear really is. Without masking, the bad ear might not look so bad. Okay, so masking is done by HISs who are trained to test hearing. Nurses who do hearing tests in the hallways at public schools, they don't know how to mask. It's not their fault. They're just doing hearing screening. Okay, but masking is a very important part of your audiometry that you will be covering later on in other courses. So when you look at this picture here, on the left, when presenting a loud tone to the bad ear, and then it says in the skull, sound can cross the skull over to the good ear. So masking noise is put into the good ear to keep it busy. And that's exactly what I tell my clients. I'm going to put some noise into your good ear. It's going to sound like a wind. Don't listen to that noise. Pay it no mind. Just raise your hand when you hear the tone, okay? It's all about the tone. Okay, great. So if we go now to look at the next slide, in research, it's a little different. Okay, and when you're looking in research, masking is done ipsilaterally. So when presenting a tone to one ear, as you can see in the blue arrow, how much noise is required to mask that tone in the same ear? Okay, so this slide is showing you ipsilateral masking. This slide is showing you contralateral masking. And contralateral masking is what you do in audiometry in your daily life as a hearing instrument specialist. Okay, ipsilateral masking is done in research. And why it's done in research is to examine the upward spread of masking. That's exactly what it's done for. Masking in audiometry, as in this slide here, is not done for that purpose at all. Masking in clinical audiometry is done to keep the good ear busy while you're testing the bad ear so you can find how bad the bad ear really is. Okay, so these two slides are meant to contrast the two types of masking that's done. In research, masking is also done bilaterally. Maybe you can be sitting in front of a speaker, and that's what it says in this slide, while presenting a tone to both ears, example, via a speaker. How much noise in black is required to mask the tone? Again, which is drawn in blue. Okay, so bilaterally, ipsilaterally, contralateral. Look at the words we're looking at, eh? Contralateral, opposite ear. Ipsilateral, the noise is put in the same ear. Bilateral, the tones and noise are put into both ears at the same time. Good. All righty, where have we gone in our notes now? Let's look at where we've covered. There you go. This is exactly what we were talking about. Okay? Now, another thing to note about masking is that it is linear. In other words, for every increase in tone intensity, the masker noise has to be raised by the same amount to keep masking the tone. So if you're hearing a tone at 20 dB and I'm masking it with 25, if I raise up the tone to 25, I'm probably going to have to raise up the masker to 30. If I raise the tone up to 30, I'll have to raise the masking noise up to 35. That's tit for tat. That's all it's done. Another thing to put a star by is masking is usually done by bands of noise, not by other pure tones. Masking is done by noise so that you don't confuse the masker with the maskee, okay? So you don't confuse the employer with the employee. You want to not get the client confused. You always want to know, that's why you can say to the client, I'm going to put some windy noise in your good ear just to keep it busy. So it doesn't sound like the tone that he or she has been listening to. And that's why it's done. Now, psychophysical tuning curves. There's another thing to star. Psychophysical tuning curves are asymmetrical. And what do they show? Well, let's look at our notes here. Our PowerPoints. See where we got here and where we are. Oh, lots of this stuff you've seen already. Look at this. Inner hair cells, outer hair cells, the active cochlear mechanism, and we've shown that 1,000 times as you're looking at these hair cells jumping and moving. The passive traveling wave without the action of the outer hair cells. The active traveling wave is a result of the outer hair cells. But note here, as my cursor, note that the shape is asymmetrical of the envelope. Okay, the envelope shape is asymmetrical. There's the envelope shape drawn in orange. Asymmetrical. And you've seen this slide in anatomy before. This person can separate tones close together. This guy's got outer hair cell damage, so the wave, the sharpening is gone, and the size, the amplification is done. Take a hearing aid, put it on that person, and you've gotten halfway. You've increased the amplitude of the traveling wave, but the sharpness can't be restored by a hearing aid. Now we're looking at the eighth nerve fibers coiled like a rope, the lows inside and the highs outside, so the eighth nerve is also tonotopic, and it has tuning curves showing that it's tonotopic. Just like the traveling wave shows that the cochlea is tonotopic. Okay, it's asymmetrical and specific frequencies are represented in specific places. Fine. The eighth nerve, tuning curves are asymmetrical. Look at the top right one, for example. This is frequency. The fewest decibels are required for some particular eighth nerve fiber. Maybe we'll pick on this one right here. We'll pick on that fiber. And you'd find out that it has a tuning curve. It's excited by one particular frequency because it takes fewest decibels to get that nerve excited. It takes way more if I move away from that eighth nerve's favorite firing frequency. And that eighth nerve has a particular favorite firing frequency because it's attached to a particular set of inner hair cells. So it's just all follows up the chain of the human being. Eighth nerve tuning curves then for normal hearing and sensory neural loss. Watch this. Here's a sharp one, normal, top right. And here would be that same top right one shown in black. And the tip of it's called the characteristic frequency. But when you've got outer hair cell damage like this, and you've lost the sharpness of the traveling wave, that curse follows you up the eighth nerve chain. And now your eighth nerve tuning curves are also rounded. And it takes more, first of all, follow my cursor, more decibels to get the neuron fiber to fire. But also the sharpness is gone because a bunch of frequencies beside the one frequency can also get that neuron to fire. And look at the roundedness here. That has everything to do with the roundedness shown here. Same, has everything to do with the roundedness shown here. So with that, now you've got two things that follow each other, and today we're looking at a third. That's why I'm just bringing this contextual information in. upward spread of masking is the third asymmetrical story. Okay, and we saw an anatomy last week. Seen in traveling waves, a loud rumbling of a truck across the street, blah, 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 can easily mask or cover the soft peeping of a canary in your kitchen. Beep, 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 beep. And because the tail can cover the envelope of the high-frequency peeping canary, but it doesn't work the other way around. And it's all because of the asymmetrical traveling wave, the asymmetrical eighth nerve tuning curves, and what happens is Miss Hairy Canary can beep, beep, beep all she wants, and if she'll make the traveling wave in your cochlea bigger, yep, but that traveling wave will not extend all the way out to the apex of the cochlea to mask the soft rumbling of a truck across the street. So lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. So let's look at this particular picture, and it's showing you two tuning curves, the neural tuning curve of the eighth nerve and the psychophysical tuning curve of the upward spread of masking. So we'll look at the psychophysical one today. This is the one that I'm circling here. This is what we're looking at today. But note, they're both like backward check marks. They're both asymmetrical. Here's how I draw the upward spread of masking. Here's a tone in blue. Pretend 1,000 hertz tone. You're hearing beep, and you're hearing it at some decibel level, whatever. Call it X. Call it 50 dB, whatever. And I'm masking that tone with a little bit of noise. And notice I'm centering the noise on 1,000 hertz. So we'll call that noise right here that I'm circling here, we'll call that a narrow band of noise, NBN. It's a narrow band of noise, unlike broadband noise. Okay, can you think of two examples of broadband noise? White noise, pink noise, okay, like a waterfall. I could have white noise, I could have pink noise. Listen to this Zoom session. I'm sitting here imitating sounds. People watching this must think I'm nuts, but I don't, whatever brings the point home, okay? Most background noise is broadband. It means it contains lots of different frequencies, from low to mid to highs. And maybe all the frequencies have equal amplitude, then it's white noise. Maybe the lows have more amplitude than the highs, then it would be pink noise. Well, narrow bands of noise they have no frequencies below a certain level, and they'll have no frequencies in it above a certain frequency. So there'll just be a narrow band of noise, and that's what we often use in masking, clinical masking, as well as in research. So let's look at this. Here's a 1,000 hertz tone, and what we've done is we've covered it with masking noise centered around 1,000 hertz. And you'll see here that the noise didn't need to be much more than the tone to cover it. So now you can't hear the tone anymore. Now remember, this is not during contralateral masking. Forget that. This is the research looking at upward spread of masking. So pretend you're hearing the 1,000 hertz tone in one ear, and the masking noise is put in the same ear. Or pretend you're hearing the 1,000 hertz tone from a speaker with two ears, and then now you're presenting masking noise from a speaker with two ears, okay? Either one of those. So, but watch what happens when I move away from 1,000 hertz. If I try to mask this tone of 1,000 hertz with a lower frequency tone, look to the left where my cursor is now. If I try to mask this blue 1,000 hertz tone with a lower frequency masking noise, band of noise, I've got to make that narrow band of noise more intense. Right here, like I'm circling. Then it will mask this this 1,000 hertz tone. And if I take a narrow band of noise here where my cursor's circling now, which is even further removed from the 1,000 hertz tone, I've got to increase the intensity, and then, yep, it'll mask the tone. And if I move further away with a narrow band of noise, again, and so you can see the trend as I keep moving further and further away from the frequency of the tone I'm listening to, I've got to keep increasing the intensity of my masking narrow band of noise in order to mask the 1000 hertz tone in question. Fine and dandy. That all kind of would make sense. The most efficient masker, the best one, in quotes, B-E-S-T, is a masking noise that surrounds the frequency in question. That's just intuitive, okay? But look what happens if I try to mask the 1000 hertz tone with a higher frequency narrow band of noise. Now I got to go to the moon. Okay? That's what I mean by the asymmetrical psychophysical tuning curve, showing the upward spread of masking. In other words, follow my cursor here. Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. I'll say it again. Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. And so you can see the shape of the backward check mark. And there it is. Once again, all I did now was draw a check mark to join the tips of the noise intensities. There you have it. Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. Note the sharp point and the asymmetrical shape. So watch what happens with sensory neural hearing loss. There you go. First, more intensity is required to hear the tone in question because the person has hearing loss. But secondly, he's more easily masked. Look at this. This frequency here can quite easily mask that frequency, the tone. And this frequency here also can, it's pretty good at masking the 1000 hertz tone. And this frequency here, okay, I had to increase it a bit for it to mask the 1000 hertz tone. So in other words, once again, the traveling wave is more rounded, the eighth nerve tuning curves are more rounded, and so is the psychophysical tuning curve, showing the person is much more easily masked. And that is the story of the upward spread of masking for the person with hearing loss who wears hearing aids. This person is more easily masked. He has more difficulty separating speech from background noise, and we can look at it from two different angles here. Remember, there's always two, okay? One is the outer hair cells are no longer sharpening the peak. So his frequency resolution is diminished. He needs a bigger difference between frequencies to recognize that there is a difference between frequencies. So for example, let's say you and me who have normal hearing, let's pretend someone with normal hearing hears a 1000 hertz tone. If I need a 1005 hertz tone to tell that there's a difference, and that may very well be the case. People can't usually distinguish between 1000 hertz and 1001 hertz. They can't. Our ears aren't that fine. It usually takes a few hertz different for us to notice that there's a difference. But if I have hearing loss and outer hair cell damage, I'm going to need a bigger difference to notice that there's a difference. My resolution has gone down because my traveling waves are more rounded. The second thing, upward spread of masking. I am more easily masked. And there's the shape. And there's the slide. Okay, so you've got two things working against people who are wearing hearing aids for sensory neural loss. And this is the reason I go into psychoacoustics like this is to highlight for you, the clinician, the reality and the knowledge that people in hearing aids mix like oil and water. We need a lot of counseling, a lot of explanation, so that people leave your office knowing the limitations of the hearing aids, so that they have realistic expectations of the hearing aids. And counseling at the very outset, so that you can tell your client, I can't make your hearing back to when you were 10 years old. I can't. But I can turn the clock back 10 years. That might be one way of looking at it, okay? We get an imperfect world. I can aid, I can make it better, but I can't just fix. And it won't work quite the way your glasses do, okay? So I want you to know that right off the bat, and then da-da-da-da. You know what I often showed in my PowerPoint slide with clients? I would call this my Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I would have normal hair cells, the damaged hair cells, and then I would have perfect English looks like, perfect hearing looks like this, impaired hearing looks like this, and then I would have it in Chinese, just to show that it's all over. And I would have those 4 pictures, bam, 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 bam. I had them laminated and up in my office. Anybody wants them, go for it. The PowerPoints, you have them. Go to a print shop, put them on a USB stick, print them up, and just say, hi, these are from Ted. Go ahead. I just use them as a counseling tool because it shows that, that's the retina, in quotes, of your ear, and those are what's damaged. It's just a pictorial thing. But if we share screen now and we look at our notes, and we see where we are regarding notes here. Okay, we are looking halfway down the page 1 here. Psychophysical tuning curves show the upward spread of masking. There you have it. That's all the stuff that we covered that I've talked about written in notes here. Asymmetry of the tuning curves show that lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. The best masker is the same frequency as the tone signal. The second best would be a lower frequency, and the worst would be a higher frequency. Just as eighth nerve tuning curves are a reflection of the asymmetrical traveling wave, so also are psychophysical tuning curves. Reduced frequency resolution due to sensory neural loss causes psychophysical tuning curves to lose point and become more rounded. Where have we heard that before? Poorer resolution means signal will be more easily masked. And I say for sensory neural, not conductive hearing loss, sensory neural, the cochlea responds more equivalently to maskers of different frequency. The rounded traveling wave causes rounded tuning curves of the eighth nerve. Rounded eighth nerve tuning curves in turn cause rounded psychophysical tuning curves. Background noise is the most common masker. High frequency consonants of speech are most easily masked. No wonder those with sensory neural loss are so bothered by background noise. Last sentence in italics, hearing aids cannot sharpen a biological peak in a rounded, passive traveling wave. Good. That brings us to the end of our discussion about the upward spread of masking. And now, as Monty Python used to say, for something completely different. But it still deals with masking. Critical bands. And a guy by the name of Fletcher. Critical bands and Fletcher. Let's look at our PowerPoint slide and see what we've got here. Critical bandwidth. Now, here's a frequency in blue. Call it 1,000 hertz, doesn't matter. And masking signal with broadband noise. Broadband noise. So they're taking a signal like 1,000 hertz and you're covering it with white noise. Okay? Decibels required to mask the 1,000 hertz signal. So we'll just call the decibels X, whatever, just whatever it was. Fletcher said to himself, what else can mask this 1,000 hertz tone? What if I did this? What if I made it a little bit narrower? What if I cut off some of the lows and some of the highs? Would I still need the same intensity to cover this 1,000 hertz tone? And what if I cut off a little bit more? Would I still need the same intensity to mask that 1,000 hertz tone? Now remember, the green is noise, the blue is a tone. Okay? So you're talking about noise versus beep, and you're narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. There's a word. Get it narrower. Still, narrow the band a bit more. Still requires no more amount of SPL to mask the signal. So look at how the height of the red is no higher than the height of the green, which is no higher than the height of the yellow, which is no longer higher than the height of the purple. So Fletcher realized, he said, you know what? There's a lot of the white noise that's just useless. I don't need that. Besides, it makes it really loud for the person because the person's hearing, follow my cursor, here, here, here. I've got all these frequencies together, and that's going to sound quite loud for the person. It's going to be kind of, what do you call it, annoying. So why don't I cut off some of the stuff that's not necessary, and cut off more that's not necessary, and cut off more that's not necessary. And he found out, look at that, all that stuff around the sides, in the highs over here and the lows over on the left, all that stuff was useless. And watch this. Oh, boom, something happened here. This one all of a sudden jumped up. When I narrowed it even further, whoops, made the band too narrow. Now I need more dBSPL to mask the signal. Here versus here. So what did he find? He found that the red was a critical bandwidth. It was required. Once I got narrower than that, whoops, I suddenly needed more dBSPL to mask the 1000 hertz signal. So here is, looks like this is the critical band in red in this particular example. And if you look at this slide, you'll see it all. The decibels required for the purple, the yellow, the green, the red were all the same until I squeezed that band even further. And once I did that, whoops, I went too far. And this is how Fletcher discovered, and this is how we came up with the bands, excuse me, of noise that are used in your hearing tests to mask hearing. That's how we found them. So if I'm testing a bad ear at 1000 hertz, I'm going to put into the good ear a narrow band of noise that are surrounding 1000 hertz, but it'll be at a critical bandwidth. I can't make the bandwidth too narrow, otherwise I'm going to need more intensity to mask the ear. So critical bandwidths is a term that you will see and encounter many times in this field. That seems to be the way the universe teaches us. When you hear about something once, you tend to hear about it fairly quickly again. I don't know why that is, but it is. So mark my words, very likely, when you're in your readings or whatever, you'll encounter that, oh, there's that one thing again, critical bandwidth. All that means is you can try and mask a signal, and you can go ahead and try and mask it with narrower and narrower and narrower bands of noise, and I can start out really nice and wide, and I can narrow it somewhat and narrow it more and narrow it more, but that's gonna, if I go further, okay? So your cochlea has bandwidths in it, represented by these hair cells. I don't know why all of this is, but they bring it down to the physiology of your cochlea and its tuning thereof, but basically critical bandwidths. Let's read in our writing what we've said or what we've talked about in the PowerPoint. Critical bands, Fletcher, 1940s, psychoacoustics researcher. Masking with a wide band white noise is not very efficient for masking a pure tone. Narrow band noise makes a more efficient masker. This is the critical band theory. According to Fletcher, the term critical bandwidths refers to adjacent internal filters in the cochlea. You can think of critical bands as rectangular areas along the basilar membrane. Each basilar membrane area responds to a limited range of frequencies. This is its critical band. Without the sharpening action of the outer hair cells, the human cochlea has about 24 critical bands. I won't ever ask you this, okay? I'm just talking to you. The bandwidths, the widths are commonly about 1/3 of an octave wide. You're just going to run into that too. 1/3 octave bands, and the noise was presented to the subject in 1/3 octave bandwidths. That all comes from this researcher. So when I talk about this, what was the critical bandwidth required? Critical bandwidths are about 1/3 of an octave and 1/3 of an octave. Okay, that's usually the width of them. That's usually what they are. In general, the width of a critical band is proportional to its center frequency. The higher the frequency, the wider the critical band is required to mask it. Fletcher masked tones with broadband white noise, BBN. He found that only a narrow band of frequencies actually contributed to masking the tone. So here's what I'm going to switch here again. When you're looking at this slide, all the purple didn't contribute to masking the tone. The gold didn't contribute to masking the tone. The green didn't really. Really what contributed mostly to the masking of that 1000 hertz tone was the red. And you can see that because when I made it narrower, when I made it narrower, you needed more. So really what was the main contribution to the masking? What was the essential? We'll call it the essential. What was the necessary frequencies required to mask that 1000 hertz tone? It would be the frequencies contained between the two red lines. Okay? That's what we mean by the critical bandwidth theory. And critical bandwidths are used in clinical audiometry when we are testing hearing, as is shown in this slide. The masking noise that's put into a good ear to keep it busy is critical bandwidths in width. Okay? The noises that are in your audiometer came from Fletcher's research. So here's hoping some of this puts or fuses a few things together. There you go. Additional frequencies in broadband noise don't really contribute much to the masking efficiency. All they do is add dB, SPL, and loudness. I'll show you in a picture here again. All the frequencies in green and yellow and purple, all they do is add annoyance. They're not necessary to mask the 1000 hertz tone. All they do is make the masking noise unnecessarily loud. Critical bandwidths, on the other hand, enable the softest masking possible. It's just the most efficient frequencies that are presented to the ear. The most efficient masker produces the greatest threshold shift with least intensity. Put a star by that. The most efficient masker produces the greatest threshold shift with the least intensity. Showing you here again, the most efficient masker can cover the tone with the least intensity. If I go narrower than the red, I need more. But if I've stuck to this bandwidth, that's what's necessary to cover that frequency with the least intensity. If I even go to the upward spread of masking slide here, the most efficient masker, I can mask the tone, I can shift your threshold for the tone, in other words, with the least intensity. Low frequencies, if I try to mask this tone here with a lower frequency narrow band, I've got to make that band more intense, so it's not as efficient. The worst is trying to mask at this frequency with a higher narrow band noise. That really sucks, because this one needs to be extremely loud in order to mask the 1000 hertz tone. And again, if you follow my cursor, lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. There you go. Cool. Critical bandwidth is a function of frequency by a guy named Zwicker. Just all that says in English is, as the frequency of the tone gets higher, the bandwidth required around the tone gets wider. Well, whatever. Here we can come to almost toward the end of today's session. So let's look at the last part of our notes on page 2. Binaural masking level difference. What you're looking at here in these notes, again, just Okay, just if I'm graying this out here, just put a star by this. That's what, I don't really care if you know about critical bandwidths are 1/3. You should know that they are 1/3 octave width, but that's all I care about. Noise, narrowband noise is used in clinical audiometry, and it's 1/3 octave bands in width. Comes from Fletcher. For speech testing, look at this one here. Speech testing. So now you're masking for speech audiometry. Well, then you can't use narrow bands of noise anymore. Then you need to use, and we usually use, pink noise. The reason we use pink noise is because, like speech, the spectrum of pink noise is greatest in the lows and goes down in the highs. So if I was to quickly draw for you here in my little book, pink noise spectrum goes down like this. And that's also the spectrum of speech. So if I show the spectrum of speech here, and I would draw vowels here and unvoiced consonants on the right, then you'll see that. Okay? So the low frequencies of speech are louder than the high frequencies, and that's the same with pink noise. So when we are using masking noise for speech audiometry, we use pink noise. Okay, back over to your notes again. And we finish this particular session. Binaural masking level differences. This deals a lot with the cocktail effect. We hear signals better in background noise with 2 ears rather than 1. This has implications for hearing aids and for listening in background noise. The cocktail party effect. Discriminating sounds in a complex listening environment due to sources' spatial separation. The phase of the signal and the phase of the noise in one ear is compared to the phase of the signal and the phase of the noise in the other ear. So there are 4 things here. Look at the guy on top. Is he happy? Not really. Watch, because the signal to both ears is in the same phase, and the noise to both ears is the same in phase. So there's nothing different. He has a hard time picking out the signal. So if he's at a cocktail party and he's listening to you standing a few feet away from him, and he's got a bunch of background babble around him, and if all that sound is the same in phase to both ears, he has a hard time hearing. But now look at B, the second one down. He's happier because something is different. The tone on the top is opposite in phase to both ears. And even the noise is the same, but doesn't matter. There's something different between the ears. So it's easier for him to pick out the signal. And you can think of it like the example I gave a few weeks ago. You got a pilot in a loud little Cessna airplane. You ever flown in a Cessna? It's like a Volkswagen with wings. Loud. And the pilot's having a hard time hearing the control tower because of the noise in the cabin. So what does she do? She takes one headphone and puts it on the head. All of a sudden, wow, I can hear way better. Weird, but true. It's because you're making something different between the ears regarding the signal you're trying to hear and the noise that's competing against you. Okay? And that's why we gave in this example here this particular picture. Okay? This guy's got something different. B. C and D. Look at D. D is happy. That's the pilot in the plane I was talking about. Okay, D. She took off one headphone. Now there's something different between the 2 ears. So it helps. Person's happy. The person who's unhappy is the person with one ear, because that person can't compare. It can't compare the signal and the noise phases to both ears. And if you look at my weird little slide, or here's another one. Same example. This guy here, unhappy at the top. Everything is identical. Now look at the middle one. Pure tone is inverted in one ear, so the person's happier. Tone detection is good. Even the third one, tone is removed from one ear. That's the pilot in the plane. Tone detection is good. Okay? Binaural masking level differences is often what researchers call it. Us clinicians, we call it the cocktail effect. My little example, Signal and signal. The top one, I've drawn in italics, so something's different. And the second one down, now the noise happens to be different. Happy, the person's happy too. The third one, like the pilot in the plane. But for the fourth one down, everything's identical. And the last one at the bottom, the person's got one ear. So essentially, this takes us to the very end of our PowerPoint, and this particular section on masking has lots to do with the binaural hearing that we covered 2 units ago at the end of Unit 4. Okay? So you've kind of covered this a couple of different times because it's all dealing with masking, so I thought I'd stick it in the masking unit as well. So there you have it now. What's the big advantage of 2 ears? Main one is localizing direction. The second one is binaural summation. Remember, 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. If the threshold in my ear is 40 here, and the threshold here is 40, if I play it in both ears at the same time, my threshold is now 35. Okay? That's binaural summation. Localization of sound, binaural summation, and the cocktail effect. 3 reasons why we have 2 ears. Okay, that's the end of the old Zoom session for today. Any questions, Karen?
I don't think so.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, it's 1/4 after. I think I'll call it a day. Next week, we'll tune in on non-electronic acoustic modifications, and Becca and Lynn Royer and I will talk about a review session to be best held that matches the needs for the most students that we can do. But otherwise, some people may not need the review session. Some people are doing just fine. People who are pulling like 90% in the course are laughing, so you're doing fine anyway. But it's been a slice. I think we're improving overall in the semesters in how acoustics is coming along. So this is generally one of your more theoretical, it's one of your more difficult courses, but hats off to you for studying and following along. I'll end this one here, and I think I'll go out for a walk run now. You know what I do sometimes? I go out a couple times a week. I sprint a block, and then I walk a block. I sprint a block, and I walk a block. Oh my God, you do that 5 times, you're dead. I'm walking the house and I'm seeing God. I'm like, I think I'll do that to myself now. Okay, we'll see you later.
All right, thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.